I want to share a short article with you today that was written by John Paris, Mountain Idiom Fading, Balsam. The homely idiom of the mountaineer is getting to be as rare as gritted bread and the granny woman. Jive talk is replacing Elizabethan. The jukebox, the newspaper, radio, and TV have killed off the balladeers who were not only singing reporters but sort of singing historians. Be that as it may, there are a few of the old-timers left whose talk is fresh as she-rain. If you want to know the old customs, the old ways, drop in on them for a setting spell and you'll get a lavish of it pure as fact. It is only off the beaten path, back where the cabins nestle among the rhododendron and the balsam, that you will find the dialect used with any integrity. And don't get the idea that because they say fetch, ham meat, pint blank, yander, and nary, that they are illiterate. Read your Shakespeare, brother, and your Chaucer. Afore, atwixt, a war. Heap of folks, pert, up and done it, usin' used for used, all these were contemporary with the Canterbury tales. Don't laugh when a mountain man talks about how he feathered into them, a phrase that passed out of standard English when saltpeter replaced the longbow. Don'tsy is mincy about eating, which is to say fastidious or over nice. Donegal means sweetheart, an expression British sailors picked up in Spanish or Italian ports and preserved by backwoodsmen whose ancestors for 2 centuries never saw the tides. When maize has passed the rosinere stage but is still not hard enough for grinding into meal, the ears are grated into a soft flour and baked into pones called gritted bread. Beans dried in the pod, then boiled, hull and all, are called leather breeches. Green beans in the pod are snaps, and shelled beans are called shuck beans. Applesauce is called sass. A smidgen is little more than a mite, and a heap is a rimption. If a man is tired, he is worried. If he's in a hurry, he's in a swivet. If he's nervous, he has the all-overs. If he's feeling puny, he's on the down-go. If he's undecided about how he feels, he is middlin' or fair to middlin'. Slaunchways means slanting, and sygodlin or anti-sygodlin is out of plumb or out of square. The toad is called a frog or a toad frog, and a toadstool is a frog stool. The woodpecker is a peckerwood. The hemlock tree is called spruce pine, while spruce is he balsam. Balsam itself is she balsam. Laurel is ivy, and rhododendron is laurel. Evening begins at noon, and day down is the pink of evening. A man who jumps and runs has lit a shuck for home. A mountain man sharpens his axe on a grinding stone or whet rock. He whets his knife on sole leather. He doesn't throw a stone, he flings a rock. To him your name ain't much common, and his old woman's aimin' to go to meetin'. He had it in the head to plow today, but it's come on to rain, and he's laid off to fix that fence. And he'll say you can't hardly blame her. The mountaineer named the peaks and rivers and streams to commemorate some incident. The shut-in is a gorge. The suck is a whirlpool. Squeeze Betsy is a narrow passage between the cliffs. Calf Killer Run is where a meat-eating bear was using. Meat Scaffold Branch is where venison was hung up for jerkings. Stillhouse Branch was a moonshiner's retreat. His spirit lives in such places as Fightin' Creek, Shootin' Creek, Gouge Eye, Vengeance, Four Killer, and Disputanta. His humor holds forth in such place names as Weary Hut, Frog Level, Shake a Rag, and Chunky Gal. Signs of his times are etched in such places as Defeat and Desolation, both branches of Bone Valley, Needmore, Poor Fork, Long Hungry, No Pone, and No Fat. His literalness shows in Black Rock, Standing Indian, Water Rock Knob, Sharp Top, 20 Mile, Naked Place, The Pocket, Pumpkin Town, Tumbling Creek, Briar Patch Mountain, Buckhorn Bald, Cedar Cliff, Hogback, Potato Hill. Incidents of his lonely life are Dust Camp Run, Mad Sheep Mountain, Drowning Creek, Burnt Cabin Branch, Broken Leg, and Raw Doe. The mountain man is never at a loss for a word, a phrase. My grandfather is one of the old-timers who has retained the speech of the mountaineer. Not long ago, he and I were watching a dance, and when the intricate steps had been completed in the old-time square dance, he observed, "That was quite a twistification." A perfectly good descriptive, though a few hundred years old. And to him, icicles will always be tags of ice. But for him and a few others like him, the quaint, colorful speech that once was the mark of a distinct and interesting way of life here in the mountains would now be extinct. Curiously enough, the language of Shakespeare and Chaucer has lived here longer than it has in the British Isles. There, too, the homely idiom of Elizabethan times has vanished. Fascinating. If you watch my videos, you know I'm crazy about language, crazy about the language of the mountains here where I live. John Paris is one of my favorite writers. He predominantly wrote about the mountains of western North Carolina. Actually, that's all that I know that he wrote about. Maybe he ventured off into Tennessee or Georgia every once in a while, but mostly he wrote about this area. I was going to see if I could see when the copyright on this book was. 1967. 1967, yeah. So he wrote for the Asheville Citizen-Times. Wonderful, wonderful writer. Wrote about all kinds of interesting things. Like me, he really enjoyed looking back at the old customs, the old heritage, the old ways of speaking. Now, I wrote down a few things so that I could, what jumped out at me when I read this, so that I could talk about, as he says, that things are vanishing, but then I wanted to say, well, what's still here? What's still here? So, the Donegal, I actually learned that word from John Paris. I'd never heard anybody in my life say it. But since I learned it many years ago, I use it now. I use it to describe my girls, especially Corey. Corey just has a sweetness about her. Not that Katie's not sweet, and I don't love her just as much. It's just that Corey has a special sweetness that the instant that I read John Paris talking about Donegal in another article that he wrote, I immediately thought of Corey. So I have brought that one back, at least in my family. It's fascinating, though, that he tells like where it come from. In other words, it come, like he said, from the sea, from people who were used to the ocean, and of course people in the mountains were not. But it reminded me of another saying that's like that I would hear growing up, and I've heard, and you may have heard it too, but it kind of saying that somebody's in a rough spot or a bad spot, they're in trouble, but you might say they're betwixt. There's that betwixt, like one of the ones that he gave an example of. A twixt, I think is what he used, but betwixt the devil and the deep blue sea. Well, certainly people in the mountains that were isolated were familiar with the devil. Religion plays a huge role in the culture of Appalachia, but again, there would have been no deep blue sea, so that was one that come with them and stayed, like so many of the others, as he was indicating. Gritted bread that he talked about. Pap made gritted bread, and so I grew up with the gritted bread, knowing what that was. I even did a whole series one time on the Blind Pig and the Acorn, how Pap, showed me that there was two different ways they made gritted bread. They made it from, like he said, corn that had just went past its softness, but then also they made it with dried corn, with totally dried corn. And I have a video about the gritted bread. It's really, really good, good bread to eat, so I'll link to that for you. Another one that I've talked about in video, and of course on my blog, Blind Pig and the Acorn, is leather breeches, dried beans. People today are still enjoying leather breeches in the mountains of western North Carolina. The all-overs, he mentioned having the all-overs. So for me, the all-overs would be when you get spooked by something. Maybe you get a little scared, something's eerie, and you have the hair on the back of your neck stand up all to attention, all those little hairs. That's the all-overs, still common. one that he mentioned, which is really common in lots of places, not just here, and maybe some of these others are as well, is fair to middling. If you ask somebody how they're doing, fair to middling, that one's common. Slaunchways. I cannot see that word that I don't hear Pap in my head saying it. Slaunchways. So that's a great one. Sigodlin. There's a bunch of those, like cattywampus. He didn't mention that one, but all those unique ways of just saying something's crooked. One that's really near and dear to my heart, and if you've watched my videos, you've probably heard me say them, and I even did a video trying to explain it, is that he went through a few there that he was basically showing that mountaineers call things by the wrong names, and he gives several examples, but one of them was rhododendron they call laurel. What is mountain laurel, technically, they call ivy. So that's me. I grew up with I'm surrounded by it everywhere I look, with laurel. Mountain laurel, we just call it laurel, is the longer leaves. Ivy is the smaller leaves. And that's what I've always called it. It's what my family called it when I was growing up. But that's one that puzzles a lot of people. Another one that he pointed out is that for us, and still in my life and when I grew up, evening starts, it's like after lunch. Most people would say, we would say dinner, breakfast, dinner, supper, but after dinner, that's the evening. Not like most people think of like 6 o'clock being the evening today. I think of that as night. It's already night. It's already got dark, or almost dark. Maybe it's dusky dark, but that's night and not evening. He used aiming. Aiming's a very common one in lots of places. I'm aiming to do this. I'm aiming to do that. Very common still in western North Carolina. And I loved the one he used about the farmer saying he had laid off to fix that fence. I find myself doing that when I procrastinate. I've laid off doing that. Now I've just got to get it done. And then all the names that he talked about, so many great ones. A lot of the ones he mentioned I'm very familiar with because they're in my area, thinking about Shooting Creek, and a few of the others. Some others I'm just familiar with because I've read them. I didn't necessarily grow up in that area. But unique names for sure. The mountains of Appalachia are full of those unique names. One that he did mention, several that he mentioned are still in use today. Like I said, Shooting Creek is a good example. But one of the ones, Raw Doe. So for local people, that's the area near Topton, the little community there. Topton is still, you hear that frequently today, but you don't hear what Raw Doe eventually become was Rodo. It just become when you said it fast. So there is a remnant of it though. There's like a little, I think it's like a little storage unit area there, and that's what it says on it. It's Rodo. So anyway, fascinating to think about the changes that have happened with language. That's kind of what John Paris was doing. He was saying, if you find the old timers, you can still sit a spell with them. He was saying, sit a spell with them and hear some of them. Well, I'm happy that all these years later, from when he wrote that, many years later, I guess, gosh, am I that old? 40 years later, it's still alive and well. And so many of you decide to come and sit a spell with me when you watch my videos. Totally different. I'd like to know what John Paris would think about videos and things like that, especially what his grandpa would think about them. But I really appreciate it when you do that, and you're helping me. You're helping me just like John Paris was trying to do it. I'm trying to do it too. You're helping me hold on to those things and make sure that they don't fade away.